Welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Basketball PH podcast. Enjoy the show.
Fantasy Basketball PH. Put your money where your mouth is. At ibang talakayan kaya tara halika. Fantasy Basketball PH ang bida. Fantasy Basketball PH. Ang numero unong basketball patasya ng Pinas. Fantasy Basketball PH. Dito mapag-uusapan mga ballers na likas. Fantasy Basketball PH. Put your money where your mouth is. Iba't ibang talakayan kaya tara halika. Fantasy Basketball PH ang bida. Ang pahina na ito'y magsisilbing daungan sa mga hilig na ang basketball ay mapag-usapan. Kasama si Papi Roy, madami kang matututunan gaya ng strategy, analysis sa kaganapan. Pag-uusapan ang DFS, roto head to head, buy low, sell high, add, draft and trade, magic puno at iba pang transaction sa laro. Lahat dito'y tatalakayin kaya wag na lumayo. Bida dito yung mga player na magaling kumamada, mala Nikola Jokic at Victor Wembanyama. Yung mga hustle na player like Russell and Dillon at iba pa ay dito natin pwedeng makonsyon. Let's talk about NPBL, UAAP and PBA together with NCAA and NBA. At sa lahat ng mga nangungopya ka ng literal, sa aking mga content di rin kayo magtatagal.
Okay, welcome to the Fantasy Basketball PH podcast, your Filipino brand of fantasy basketball. Ang numero unong fantasy basketball podcast ng Pinas. And of course, I am your host, Papi Roy, in the house. We have a very special episode for today. But of course, before that, let me give a few shout-outs, especially to our league sponsor in a league that we're gonna talk about later. So this is an English episode for our podcast. Shout out to our Filipino community. Of course, we would like to give mad props and shout out to Daily Fantasy, the number one daily fantasy app here in the Philippines. Lead your team to the championship. So if you want to check out Daily Fantasy, just check out their link, www.playdailyfantasy.com. And they are one of the special people and company who believed in us and sponsored the first ever Fantasy Basketball PH War Game. So let me just give a shout out to our honorable guests for this league. Of course, we have Adam King, lead analyst of Fantasy Basketball International. That's alongside B-Dub. Shout out to B-Dub. Host of Balls Deep podcast in Between Two Dans. And I think that's now part of the Old Man Squad channel. And shout out to Dan Besfris. He is also a contributor of Roto Baller and Roto Wire. And I'm also going to shout out to Dan Titus of Yahoo Fantasy and Roto World, Raphael Johnson of Roto World, NBA Fantasy Bible, or we all know him. We kind of like give his nickname, D-Mac, of Between Two Hoops. We also have Kayla Fonte of Last Word on Sport and Bitches Be Ballin'. She's going to start the podcast to give space to our, I call them fantasy GMs, because it's kind of like pushing the boundaries of fantasy basketball and now introducing female GMs to it. And then we also have Scott Keller of Menace Padman with Will Slump Beer and Podcast Pierre, Matty G of Inside Sports, and of course Eric Zilber, our boy Eric of Day to Day Fantasy. So shout out to you all, shout out Daily Fantasy, and we are now with the King. Welcome to the show, Adam King. Kingy, what's up?
Not much, mate. It's always nice doing a show in the evening and not having to get up stupidly early, which I'm going to have to tomorrow morning when I have Dan Vespris on my show. So, no, I appreciate you having me on the show and looking forward to talking about war games.
There you go. And shout out to Dan. Well, just a joke to Dan. What can you expect to old man Dan getting up early and doing a show, right?
Yeah.
Very
Yep.
Dan Besbris. Anyway, so Adam, I kind of like know you a lot. Well, not a lot, not personally, but I've been following you for quite some time. But of course, I want to officially introduce you to the Filipino fantasy basketball community because we're kind of getting bigger and bigger every year. So, how did it all start, Kingy? The fantasy basketball thing, you being involved in basketball in general. How did it all start?
Involved in basketball from when I was young. So I've played since I was about 7. So back in it's a long time. 1986, I think I started playing basketball, and yeah, I've basically played it, still playing it now. So it's been almost 40 years that I've been playing basketball. Grew up watching as much of the NBA as I could. It was obviously pretty limited back in the 90s in terms of how much content we could get. But yeah, sort of floated away from the NBA a little bit when, I want to say when I was sort of in my early 20s, and then came back to it in, I don't know, the mid 2000s, 2010. And a couple of my mates that I made through playing basketball, who are actually Filipino, they said to me, "We've got this fantasy basketball league, and someone's dropped out of the league, and so we have a manager spot available. Do you want to play?" And I said, "Well, sure. I have no idea what it is, but I'll play." And and that was where it started. So I fell in love with it. I love numbers. I love stats. So. Um, the first couple of years I was just writing like a weekly blurb kind of thing for the league, and I really enjoyed doing that. And started as I started getting into it a bit more, I found Dan Vespris and Josh Lloyd. They were the first two podcasts that I found, and obviously Josh is from Australia as well, so I managed to connect up with him and just said, I think this is something I'd like to do. I'm not sure where to start, and so I actually happened to be going down to Melbourne, where Josh lives, for something. I can't remember what it was now, but he was good enough to come and meet me and have lunch and a couple of beers, and he just told me sort of how his journey started, and I thought, well, if it was good enough for him, I'll just copy what he did. So he gave me a contact for RotoWire. So I emailed them and just said, look, I'm really keen to just get into the space somehow, and they brought me on as a blurb writer. So I had to do a bit of training and that sort of thing. So that was where it started, writing blurbs. I went from there to Fantrax and did a bit of work for them. And then Dan Vespris sort of hit me up and said, hey, we've got a spot it was Hoop Ball at the time. Would you like to come and work over here? I said, absolutely. So went over there, worked with him for a couple of years. And then I think it was just a time in my life where I needed a bit of a break. And so I sort of said, look, I'm just going to step back for a while. I'm not sure how much time I can invest in this just with family and work and that sort of thing. And so I took a little bit of a break. And then B Dub, who is another Australian from Melbourne, who had been a friend of mine for a few years. I knew he was doing FBI, or Fantasy Basketball International, and I sort of just said, look, I think I'd like to start doing a podcast rather than writing articles and things like that. So I messaged him and I just said, look, would you like to start up an FBI podcast? And he was, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. So yeah, started doing that. And it's, I don't know, I prefer podcasting to writing. It's a lot less effort, takes a lot less time. So yeah, the podcast is sort of just, it's grown. I'm still doing writing for RotoWire, so I still do player blurbs. It's a really good way for anyone that is looking to get into the industry. It's a really good starting point because you have to watch all the games. You have to know all the players, everything that's happening, injuries. And yeah, so it still doing the writing, doing the Balls Deep show, obviously for FBI. And then when Dan started up his Old Man Squad network, he sort of reached out to me and we sort of hit it off again. And I suggested the Between Two Dans show, which we've done a few episodes of now, and our Balls Deep podcast, and Noah Rubin, who does Tank Me Later for us as well, where we're actually heading over to the Old Man Squad to join the crew that he's got there, which is growing pretty quickly. So nothing will change on the FBI side. It just means we're part of Dan's network as well, which we can work together and promote each other. And as you know, the fantasy basketball community is all about promoting and collaborating and working together. So yeah, that's where it started for me, and I still love it. It's still a hobby for me that just happens to take up a significant amount of my time.
Yeah, for sure. It's a hobby that uh sometimes it feels like it's more than work in
Yeah,
terms of like spending time and all. But when you're actually doing it, time flies, right? Maybe
yeah,
because it's something that we love and enjoy. And from time and time again, there's always something that challenges us. Maybe it's the news, the players, our other analysts, or any
yep.
situation. So yeah, I love, and I'm honored that you shared that story, Kingy. Okay, so I think our followers and the Philippine community is super excited to get to know you more in terms of, hey, what are the usual takes of Adam. So if you haven't followed Adam King yet, please follow him via X or Twitter. Later I'm gonna let him promote everything, some of his shows we already mentioned. So let's start off with a couple of players that you like. Let's start with the first couple of rounds. Any
Okay.
players in particular that you really like? When we did several mock drafts, and I noticed a
Mm.
couple of names that you usually end up. So I am expecting hearing them out. So
Yep.
who are these guys?
Yeah, so obviously it depends on the format and everything a little bit, but generally speaking, I do head-to-head category leagues. Anyone that follows me knows that I like to punt categories, usually two or three or even four. So yeah, I'm not afraid to reach a little bit to get players because their value shifts when you disregard certain categories. So LaMelo Ball is someone that I'm pretty high on again, and I mean that may come back to bite me if if the injuries continue. Um, but yeah, look, he if he falls to me in the sort of the middle of the second round, I still think he can be a first round player per game if he's healthy, if the Hornets are competitive. So a lot of ifs, but yeah, I just think he's got quite a unique game. So he's someone that I like to grab. Um, if I move through a little bit, that sort of, I mean, the first round. If I was looking at the first round, who do I want to take? It depends where I'm drafting. Obviously, I'd love to get Wemby, but you need the number one pick to get Wemby. So, um, if you don't have the number one pick, I like picking either in that top four or five, or sort of down towards the turn, so 11, 12, and then I think you can go for I like Trey Young this year. I think he's probably going to be in for a good year. And again, that's potentially on the high end, but if I was drafting him, I would be punting field goal percentage potentially, or one of those categories that drags him down. So I like Trey Young. And then moving through to the sort of the third round, Jalen Williams seems to be landing in my team a little bit. Both he and Jalen Johnson are guys that I like in that range, but I tend, I think probably a month ago I preferred Jalen Johnson. I think it's Jalen Williams now for me. I just think he does a little bit more, and I like the certainty in terms of
Yeah.
Oklahoma City are going to be competitive. They're going to have to play their guys, where Atlanta I don't know. We're not sure what to expect from Atlanta this year. So Jalen Johnson will still be very good, but is there going to come a point in the season where they just decide to rest him a little bit? We don't know that. So I like Jalen Williams. Who's another guy that I like in that range? Depending how far we go down, I mean, we're going to get down into the middle rounds where I'm probably going to talk about Jalen Duren and Mark Williams, two centers that I like targeting. And do we want to go that far down though yet into the fourth, fifth round?
Sure, sure. But I have a quick question for you. So,
Yeah.
I it's so when I started this fantasy basketball hobby of ours, I think that was during COVID season when I don't have a lot of things to do. I really envisioned to And I really envision to, organize a lot of leagues in the fantasy basketball community.
Yeah.
This year, I was able to do that. And perks of doing that is I've been observing trends
Yeah.
in the first couple of drafts that I did. And this is in relation to your J Dub pick, which I also love.
Hmm.
Aside from the certainty, his percentages, amazing, amazing. But
Yeah.
the question that I have for you is I noticed that at least in our community, J-Dub is really being picked in the second round. Huge majority of our leagues is 14 teamers, and
Yeah.
he's being really picked hard, usually middle to the last couple of rounds
Hmm.
of the second. And the names that are falling, that if you check the Yahoo ranking, are ahead of him, are Laurie Markkanen, and another one is Desmond Bain. So I have a question
Okay.
for you. Out of these three players, do you still
Yeah.
like J-Dub? From given that of course Laurie Markkinen has the Utah concerns down
Yeah.
the road, right? And then I don't know, I don't know if people kind of like forgot about Desmond Bain. I understand that his points and some of this usage gonna volume down a little bit with Ja Morant healthy, but he's just kept falling in the recent drafts that we had in the fantasy community.
Yeah, it's again, it probably would come down a little bit to are you punting? What categories do you need? That's always a question you need to ask when you're comparing players. But if we're just looking at, I guess, across the board stuff, who would I rather? I'm not that high on Larry Markkinen. I know he's been really good the last couple of years, but if we remember back to when he was in Chicago, he struggled. I think he's just in a situation now where he's best player on a bad team. And as you said, there's that concern, as we've seen the last couple of years, where Utah just shut it down in February. Um, and so Larry Markkinen could be limited during that phase of the fantasy season. Uh, and he doesn't really, I mean, for me, he's just points, rebounds, threes, really. Like, he doesn't really get defensive stuff. He doesn't get a lot of assists. His percentages are good, but I don't think he has upside to sort of get much better. I think we've seen the best of Lowry Markkinen, and as they improve their roster, he's probably going to fall back a little bit. Desmond Bain, yeah, I think you're right. Like, people have just slept on him and forgotten about him, and then in by forgetting about him, they've then also gone, well, Ja Morant is going to be healthy. Marcus Smart is going to be healthy. So where does Desmond Bain fit? But he was doing all of that stuff when Ja
Yeah.
was healthy and when Jaren Jackson was healthy. So he he is probably one of the bigger sleepers this season, I think, because he's been drafted pick 40, somewhere like that, and he could easily be a top 30 player. Um, I think Jalen Williams would probably be my preference just because I think he does everything. He rebounds, he scores, he hits threes, he's efficient, he gets assists, he gets defensive stuff. Um, his role is really set. He doesn't rely on high usage like Lowry Markkinen does. He needs the ball in his hands. He needs to be scoring where Jalen Williams could have a game where he might only get 12 points, but he could get you 7 assists, 6 rebounds, 3 steals, 2 3-pointers. Um, so I think he has the most appeal, and where you said he's going in the middle of that second round in a 14 teamer, so that's what, sort of the early 20s, 2023 through to 28. I think it's probably on the high side, but if you were picking at 20, I don't know, 26 or 25, that means your next pick is not going to be till 32 or something like that, and decent chance he's not coming back to you. So I think in a 14 teamer, yeah, you probably have to reach a little bit higher to get him. So I think it's okay.
Yeah, and the thing that I love about J-Dub as well. So it's the analysis is being backed up by stats already. That's there.
Yeah.
Uh, Plus there's when Josh Giddey moved to the Chicago Bulls. And during the interview, I've been following the interviews for quite some time, every part of the year, like this season, and it's important for me to hear out the plans and the coach. Even though sometimes, like the Paul Reed incident last year, sometimes it didn't work for us fantasy
Yeah.
basketball fans. Like, oh, come on, it really killed us. But then again, this season, OKC is really pushing J Dub to shoot more threes, which is
Hmm.
nice because he has a good percentage. Plus, he probably gets more scoring and facilitating role this season. So on top of everything, he still has upside. And I love those
Mm.
cases in fantasy basketball because the floor is super, super great. And then he still has upside in
Yeah.
early rounds. It's kind of like rare to find those players in the early rounds. So yeah, J Dub is someone that needs more love in the fantasy community. Mentioned a couple of big men in the middle rounds. You
Mm.
mentioned Jalen Duren and possibly one of the players that will slide just because of the injury
Yeah.
concerns, Mark Williams. So your thoughts about those two big men?
Yeah, I had them probably 2 weeks ago. I had them relatively close in terms of like if they were both there and I was picking at pick 50, who would I take? I think there's pros and cons for both. Given the injury to Mark Williams that we've heard of in the last couple of days, which is not his back. I mean, that's a good thing. It's not a back injury, so fingers crossed he has moved through that and the back isn't a concern anymore. But the fact he's already got a foot injury for a big man is sometimes concerning because they've got a lot of weight to carry around and there's a lot of banging, a lot of ankles and feet when they're jumping because everyone's crashing the board. So it's a little bit worrying. So I think Jalen Duren is now pretty clearly my preferred option of the two. But in saying that, I think, as you indicated, I think Mark Williams is going to slide. So I think you don't have to take Mark Williams at pick 50. You could take Jalen Duren and then get Mark Williams 2 rounds later, or even 3, depending on who you're drafting with. Some people just don't want to touch him because of the injuries. But I think both, if in a perfect world where they're healthy and the teams are competitive and they're playing 65 games, I think both could be top 40 players. But again, like with LaMelo, there's a lot of ifs there.
Yeah, for sure. Mark Williams is currently ranked in Yahoo number 89. So
Mm,
that's uh being bumped 3 rounds down from
yeah,
usually around that round 4 5-ish area. So that's value for Mark Williams, but it's not for everyone, I guess. Especially those GMs that had experience the injury galore from the
yeah,
past 2 seasons, and that's recency bias, I guess. But I think it's logical. There's always a 10th category in 9 cat fantasy format, and that's health, and that's games played. So
yeah,
again, it's subjective. The other peoples are more bold about it. Others are too conservative. So for me, when I try to give advices, I always try to push people to be their own analyst, and
yeah,
try to explore and try to experience it, because there's a difference between you owning a certain player versus you trying to analyze from afar.
yeah,
You'll possibly end up with the same results just because it's based on stats, but based on how you maneuver and how you handle or manage that player, it's gonna be a different experience.
yeah,
You'll get a sense of like, hey, maybe I can draft Mark Williams, but not my first center, or
yeah,
not my second center if I'm a little bit too conservative. But if you're getting him as your third center, for me that's already a value. That's
yeah.
that's actually kind of like diminishing the risk. Last couple of rounds. Who are your guys?
Yeah, look, quite a lot. Once you get, I mean, Isaiah Hartenstein is another guy that I'm pretty high on this season, who you can get probably in that Mark Williams range, sort of in the 70s or 80s. So again, you don't have to be taking him in the 50s. Although, in saying that, I know in a couple of analyst mock drafts that I've done, he has gone in the 50s. But yeah, I don't think that's a 100% accurate reflection of where he's going. But if we get down into those last few rounds, sort of after pick 100, there's actually a lot of guys I like this year, which isn't always the case. And I do think some of them are going to, over the next couple of weeks, probably be pushed very close to the top 100 or even inside the top 100. I don't have ADPs in front of me, but Trace Jackson Davis, I think he's going to get a push as we get closer to the season. Tyus Jones is probably going to get a bit of a push now that he's starting for the Suns. Onyeka Kongwu, I know he's going late in drafts, and I think that's probably because people are just sick of waiting for him to start. So I like grabbing him. Dyson Daniels is someone that I've talked about a lot on my show that I'm high on this season. I hope he starts and plays 30 minutes. I'm not obviously involved in that decision making, but that would make sense to me. Who else have we got down the bottom there? I'm sure there's someone else that I'm taking. Oh, Ben Simmons. Look, I mean, that could come back to bite me as it has in the last few years. But I was on the show with Chad this morning, and we talked a little bit about Ben Simmons, and I just think this year feels a little bit different because the hype normally comes from Ben Simmons and from his camp, but it's actually coming from the team, from their coaches, from their trainers. And for me, I think a lot of his issue, obviously he's had the back issues and the hamstrings and all that sort of thing, but I think mentally he is probably in a better place because the team isn't looking to win this season. They're not pushing that we have to win 60 games. They're just, let's see if we can get Ben Simmons healthy and back to the way he was playing when he was in Philly. Let's see what Cam Thomas can do. Let's see what Noah Clowney can do. Let's see if Nick Claxton can be an elite center in the NBA. So I don't think there's a lot of pressure on him this year, which I'm hoping will mean that he can just stop worrying about all of the talk about free throws and three-pointers and injuries and just focus on playing. So if he's there in the last round, I'm taking him in almost every league, because at that point, if he gets injured or he doesn't look good, you just drop him. If he plays well, you either hold on to him or trade him. If he doesn't fit your build, if you need someone that hits threes and that sort of thing, if he's putting up top 60 numbers over the first month, trade him and get someone back before he gets injured potentially.
Yeah, I also like those two Aussies. For some reason, Dyson Daniels, I noticed that he's been sliding in our
Mm.
leagues.
Mm-hmm.
But for Ben Simmons, he's one of my option as possibly a fourth or fifth guard alongside Scoot Henderson. I think
Mm-hmm.
those two are good. Well, not only good but rare assist
Yep.
guys down the
Yep.
drop. So you have to really take note of this players with not only the opportunity and possibility to bounce back, but also it's about really the dynamics of drafting.
Mm.
I mean, you have to have a backup and additional backup of your guys.
Yep.
Either it's position wise, either it's stat wise, and this couple of players that Kingy mentioned are very, very for me. It's not more like upside picks anymore. It's more like part of the strategy. It's more of like
Mm.
you're comfortable picking certain players first, middle rounds, just because on the back of your head, oh, I can get Tyson Daniels on a value to pump up my steals, stuff like that.
Yep. Yep.
But it shouldn't end there. You should have like another backup for Dyson Daniels because
Yes.
Dyson Daniels is quite popular, especially in the international side of mocks and drafting. So
Yep.
I guess we have to see in our upcoming league, The most anticipated, at least on our end, because we'll be able to, and we are fortunate to play with you guys. And of course, I would like to check out on you on what are your thoughts about our upcoming league, the FBPH War Games. This I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar yet with other initiative from your side of the world. If there was an opportunity for you to try out a team head-to-head format, because
Yep.
in essence, I format this one to be a little bit more fun. Because because to be honest, Kingy, I don't know if you experienced this. There were instances wherein fantasy basketball sometimes gets stale, just because
Yep.
us we always do the same thing, not practically the same thing, more of like, oh, I have to prepare for a certain interview, I have to prepare for a certain episode, write
Mhm.
something, analyze something. So me, my personal experience, there were months that I thought that, oh, is this the phase where I'm trying to get bored or whatnot? And I don't want that to happen. So I thought
Yep.
that I have to think of something to kind of like spit fire the passion that I had, and I want to bring that Papi Roy back. So off season, I was really planning out this, and I didn't thought that it could get traction, but when I visualized it, I was hyped. Like, oh,
Yep.
I haven't done this format, and I was thinking of, oh, we're not only checking out and planning for our own teams. Now we have to coordinate with other team managers
Yeah.
to win as a
Yeah.
team. I was like, oh, I love it. I kind of like was hype about it. So I want to get your thoughts about it, Kingy. What was your first impression, and what's the strategy being the team captain of Team World for our war games?
Yeah, look, I mean, to answer that part, well, part of that question, it's not something I've done before. So I haven't drafted as part of a team. It's always been an individual kind of thing. We did do, I don't think it was last year, maybe the year before, we did a something like an analyst versus listeners league or something where we had six listeners and six analysts, but it was more just let's see who can win the league. There wasn't a team element to it other than, hey, we've got three analysts in the top four or something like that. There was no strategy like there might be in this one. So I'm excited. Like you, I'm always trying to come up with new ideas, new formats, new scoring, anything. And luckily I can run ideas by like I'm trying to come up with a new format at the moment, and I can run my ideas by Josh Lloyd. Like I can just message him and we'll have a conversation about it, and so I can get something that sounds good in my head. He may sort of go, oh, you might want to tweak this a little bit or change this. So that's again, as I said, part of the fantasy basketball community is that it's very collaborative and supportive. So I can feel comfortable by going to anyone with those questions. So yeah, look, I'm excited. The guys that are the people that are in my team, I know them all pretty well. So once we've done decided the order or the who's first, who's second, and then the order will flow from there. I'm assuming I will then this is again in my mind. I will talk to all of them and say, okay, we've got pick 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Let me know what pick you want, and hopefully they don't all come back and say I want pick 4, because then I'm going to have to decide, well, who gets the other picks. um i think I think they're probably going to say more something like, oh, I want to pick at the back end, so 14 or 12 or 16. So I don't think it'll be too much of an issue. But then what we need to talk about is, what does the strategy look like? We don't all want to have the same strategy going into it, because then we're going to be taking each other's players. So if I'm punting points and threes, I don't want whoever's at pick 4, for example, to also punt points and threes, because we'll be after the same players. So we're going to have a bit of a discussion around what are our strategies, who's punting, who's not punting, what are we punting. Anyone got any players that they really want on their team, and maybe we could leave them for them. Because fantasy is about having fun, and you
Yeah.
want the guys on your team that you like. And so, yeah, if someone was to say, I really want Emmanuel quickly, even though I want him as well, I'll be like, okay, sure, we'll leave him for you and hope that your team doesn't take him. We obviously can't plan for what your team's going to do, um, but no, I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be interesting to be playing as part of a team, and I know that there's a prize, I think, for the individual winner, but also for the winning team. So it's not just bragging rights. There is an incentive financially for the team to finish on top as well. So no, it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and shout out to Daily Fantasy for sponsoring us.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, when you're just discussing it, I was envisioning that it's the draft is I'll be doing a separate episode to explain how it works to
Yeah.
not prolong this episode, but nonetheless, that's the fun part of this war game. So I got inspired because I'm also a wrestling fan. And then NXT has this war games wherein usually it's
Mhm.
per group. So I was imagining, hey, I want to put chaos during the draft because there's not gonna be trades in
Yeah.
this league. So the chaos there is like what Kingy mentioned. You're trying to plan as a group. You might end up wanting the same guys, but you're also thinking of the other group who might end up, hey,
Yes.
they might get it if you won't get it. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's gonna be chaos. It's gonna be fun. My plan, Kingy, is to do a recording during the draft for Team Philippines. I don't know if you want to do the same thing, but I think this league format highlighted the fun in drafts, a little
Yeah.
bit of flavor in drafts. I also contemplated between customizing the actual regular season. The reason why I ended up with the idea of, hey, let's not do trades and it's more of like team regular season records because we're all busy and I want
Mm.
this league to be fun. If we need a lot more, customization and effort to this, then it kind of like maybe to other analysts it's fun to really be sit down and analyze stuff, but I want it to be more fun in a sense that, oh, this is a camaraderie thing, this
Yeah.
is a team thing. So it's for me, almost big portion of it is the draft, which is usually the exciting part. And
Yeah.
to the listeners, we're not gonna play against each other within the team. I'm gonna be customizing the weekly matchup. The Team Philippines is always gonna end up having a weekly match with the Team World. So
Yes. Yeah.
gonna be fun, gonna be chaos. Super excited about it. Um, whoa. With that said, Kingy, any message to Team Philippines? You had couple of Filipino friends. We are courteous, we are kind, but we love trash talk. We're kind of like the Asia the Mexicans in Asia. And
Yeah.
it's not that we love chaos. It's more of like we're passionate about it.
Yeah.
So any message to Team Philippines?
No, look, I will say I'm aware of the trash talk element because where I live here in Australia, in Canberra, there's actually a Filipino basketball league, because there's that many Filipinos here that want to play basketball, and I've played in that league. And despite the fact that I was, well, certainly one of the tallest in the league, being 6'6", I was against a lot of guys that weren't that tall, but they weren't afraid to throw me around and talk it up and that sort of thing. So I'm aware of how passionate you are about basketball. So no, look, I would say, and I'm terrible at trash talk. So I'll have to find out who on my team enjoys trash talk. I don't know. Maybe it's Dan Titus. I don't know. He might be a trash talker, but yeah, no, look, I would say like we're excited and we're ready for a challenge. So we're certainly not underestimating what this is going to look like. And I like the fact that you're going to manually set up the matchup so that we're always playing someone from the Philippines team and not someone on our own team. which I'm certain will end or result in some trash talk throughout the season. And the no trades element is interesting as well. I think that's going to put a little bit of extra pressure on the draft, which is, as you said, that's what we want. We want it to be chaotic. So no, I think it's going to be interesting, and I think it could be pretty successful and could actually sort of spurn not a new format, but a variation on what fantasy basketball looks like, and people could be doing it all over the world by some point. Who knows?
Yeah, hoping that happens. Not to take credit from it, but just to spread fun. Because
Yeah.
I'm one of those fantasy enthusiasts that I always think about the word fantasy. Sometimes people, especially the new ones, they tend not to play fantasy basketball because they are thinking, oh, it's about stats, it's about math. Me
Mm.
personally, I even if I lose a certain league, though of course because of the monetary commitment, it's awful, right? But then
Yeah.
again, there's always I totally believe that it's called fantasy for a reason. There
Yeah.
should always be a flavor there that is gonna make you feel a general manager. And general managers love the way they do. Well, maybe most of them because of money.
Yeah.
It's a business thing, but I'm pretty sure part of their heart and their passion is I just love this dude. I want to draft him. Or I just,
Mm.
I love this build. I love our team. Even though maybe I am crazy of thinking we're good and people are saying we're
Yeah.
bad. For some reason, in my realm as a GM, I think we're good. And that's fine.
Yeah.
Because that's how it works. So yeah, I just want to share that up because I'm seeing your tweets also kind of like voicing that part of fantasy, and then I love it, Kingy, and thank you for kind of like sharing your thoughts about that side of the fantasy basketball, because sometimes we tend to be competitive and we forgot about that part wherein it's
Yeah.
supposed to be
Yeah.
fun, right? It's supposed to have no limit. If just don't pick Scoot Henderson in the first round, that's
Yeah.
fine. But
Yeah.
if it's like within tires, and then you're like, for example, my plan last pick in one of our leagues, I'm gonna take Kyle Anthony Towns, Chet Holmgren.
Yeah.
That's one of my strategy in one of my leagues. For me, even though I could get some feedback about it, it's fine. If
Yeah.
it doesn't work, totally fine. Now next year, I'm not gonna do that. But then
Yeah.
again, for me, I find a fire when you're conceptualizing something, and then as you draft players and as you play fantasy, it becomes real. It's more of like,
Mm.
oh, I'm trying to build something that I think is gonna work. So let me maneuver my draft regardless of what everybody says. So yeah, I just want to
Yeah.
put it there because that's the purpose of War Games. So I don't know if you're familiar with NXT, guys who are watching wrestling. Shout out to William Regal, their commissioner. Whenever that's kind of like a theme every year in WWE NXT, there's a certain word or how he pronounced War Games that puts fire to the wrestlers. He says, we are gonna do war games. I can't copy the voice, but if you can
Yeah. Yeah.
imagine it, it's hype. It's hype. Okay,
Yeah.
so enough of me. Last couple of words, Kingy. Thank you so much for joining the show. Anything to plug? Anything to share?
Yeah, look, I mean, a couple of just random thoughts that I've had while we're doing the show and while you've been talking is I also love wrestling, so I certainly get it. I have wrestling tattoos. My son is named after a wrestler, so wrestling is something that I've loved since I was a kid as well. Um, and I'm lucky enough to have met The Rock and Triple H, Mark Henry, Brock Lesnar. So I've met a few of those WWE older guys now. But so yes, certainly get the War Games reference. I would say to people, as you've said, you want fantasy to be fun, and the monetary element. If you lose, obviously that's disappointing, and you feel like you've not wasted your money, but lost a bit of money or given it to a friend or whoever you're drafting with. But always look back and have a look at why you lost. It's usually injuries, like or missed games or whatever it is. So don't necessarily look at the result. Have a look at your strategy and your process. And if it was just because your top guy missed 30 games and then it's fine. Like, I guess it's justified. And for me, in my mind, I always do that. I always have a look at, well, why didn't I win this season? What were the reasons for that? And it's usually not because of how I drafted. I can usually draft pretty well. So I would suggest, if possible, it isn't possible for everyone, do multiple leagues, not just one, because you can then try different strategies. And I know for me, like, I've got slow drafts happening already, and then I've got because I think one, two, three. I'm in 14 leagues. I wouldn't say to everyone go in 14 leagues, but when the season rolls around in 3 weeks or whatever it is, I'm going to forget who I drafted in half of these teams. And so I'm going to look at my roster and get excited and go, oh, that's right, I've got this guy on this team, and I really like this build that I've got. So try and be in a couple of leagues if you've got the time and the energy to put into it. Experiment with other formats like you're doing here with War Games. I trialed a new format in one of my leagues last year, and the feedback from the group was very positive, and that the idea, much like you, I was just trying to come up with a way to make fantasy a bit more fun, but also I think an issue that we come across in head-to-head leagues once we get to January, February, March, is that half the teams are eliminated, and so they don't care. So they're not setting their lineups. They don't want to make trades. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on. So as a way of rectifying that, in one of my leagues, we actually ended the league in January and did a complete redraft. So we split into two. It was a 16 team league. So we split into 2 leagues of 8, top 8 and bottom 8. So the top 8 redraft completely. It's a new 8-team league. So your rosters then are obviously much better because you're only drafting like 90 players or whatever, 80 players. Whoever finished first gets the first pick. So there is an advantage to still leading at that point. But it means that injuries are a little bit negated down the stretch because you're almost drafting 2 first-round players, not just one. If a guy misses some time, it's fine because your roster is so strong that you can cover for it. And then you play it out like a normal league, 6 rounds, playoffs, and whoever wins gets the money. Exactly the same for the bottom 8. They redraft, so they get a new roster. So they might have had a terrible roster and injuries all season, so they get a fresh start. And the winner of that league gets the number 1 pick the next year. So the guy that won that in the league that we split last year, he's going to get the number 1 pick this year and probably get Wemby. So he'll feel much better about himself. So I'm actually doing that in a few leagues this year. It's obviously a bit more work because you have to set up 2 extra leagues and then do 2 extra drafts. But I love drafting, so I'd draft every week if I could. So they were just my thoughts in terms of plugs. I mean, you've done most of it, but yeah, Twitter is where you find my stuff. Twitter or X at AdamKing91. The podcast is everywhere: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So anywhere you listen, you can find it there. FBI basketball is our website. So lots of leagues. The World Cup is up. Well, about to start drafting. We're still filling. There's still about 100 spots, I believe, which I'll be giving away some spots on my show in the next few days. So yeah, if you wanted to be in the World Cup, I think the prizes are something like $13,000 or $14,000 US, I believe. So big money there. If you can win, there's 576 teams. We've also just got a ton of redraft leagues and all sorts of things in our Discord server. So if you're looking to join more leagues, go through yourself or find me and I can point you in the right direction to go and join a league. Yeah, but that's where you'll find me. That's what we've got coming up. Lots of shows, lots of content over the next it's 2.5 weeks till the start of the season. Preseason starts in 6 hours, I want to say.
Yeah. we're almost there.
Yeah.
NBA is coming already. Lots of news. Unfortunately, to people who already drafted, couple of injury news has been popping already. Not that not a lot of like big injuries yet, but
No.
still a bummer. Still a bummer. But yeah. Thank you so much, Kingy, for dropping by. Again, we appreciate your presence here. We're super excited playing with you in our upcoming war games. We're expecting to learn more from you here in the community. We love basketball and slash fantasy basketball
Hmm.
to the point that you know how many leagues I have right now, and the reason why I can't kind of like I wanted to join FBI and Josh Lloyd's leagues, but I already got maximum four accounts in Yahoo full, almost full, around 26 leagues already. So I
Okay.
was, it's every year, I always think, oh, I have to, I have to
Yeah.
just focus on one account, 8 to 10 leagues should be enough. Now I
Yeah.
already have 26. So,
Yeah. 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 I think I did one season where I had about 23 or 24. And then I said, no, look, I need to cut back here. But I just love waivers and setting my lineups or everything that comes with having a roster and managing that roster. As you said, you're a general manager. You want to have that feeling that you are looking after a team, and it is fantasy, but it's still fun, and so yeah, more teams the better, I say.
for sure. And you already mentioned one of the perks of it. You get to try and explore
Yeah.
several builds, right? So
Yep.
I had a couple of same picks wherein I got tired of, hey, let me try getting Embiid. And I thought of, what if
Yep.
Embiid gets injured? Knock on the wood. So I tried when AD slipped, same pick, I'm gonna pick AD. And then the other
Yep.
one, same pick, I'm gonna pick another guy. So it's fun. It's fun
Mm.
until it's actual regular season. We're in.
Yeah.
There's a waiver wire and you can only pick him like one or two leagues because
Yeah.
everybody's picking them already. But
Yep.
but but nonetheless, there's still pleasure and there's still fun out of it. So
Yep.
I'm not preventing everyone to do it. It's a challenge for sure, but it's also fun. It's a
Yep.
mix of everything. Okay, so Kingy, thank you so much. It has been fun. Hopefully, we get to do this one more time or more to come in the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to our fantasy basketball community in the Philippines, shout out to you guys. This is a special episode for you, getting to know Team World while getting to know and learning from our international fantasy basketball analyst. So we're hitting a lot of birds in one stone. So I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Thank you so much, everyone. Again, this has been your NBA Fantasy Papi Papera in the house. Goodbye, everyone.